But first, to the developing controversy around Gary Lineker and his removal from Match of the Day. It follows the row over his tweets earlier this week, and one which criticised the government's new asylum policy.
He's refused to apologise for a post comparing the language used to launch the policy to the sort of language used in 1930s Germany. When news first broke that the former England captain would not be presenting Match of the Day tomorrow night, the BBC claimed he had agreed to stand down while an agreement was reached on his use of social media. However, Lineker has made it clear to Channel 5 News presenter Dan Walker that this was incorrect and added that he was removed for refusing to apologise. Well, things soon moved on. Lineker's colleague Ian Wright made clear he would not be appearing on the show as an act of solidarity with Lineker. Another former England captain, Alan Shearer, soon followed suit, made clear he would also refuse to appear.
Micah Richards, who was not scheduled to appear on the show tomorrow night, has also tweeted that he would not be involved if he were to be asked. Jermaine Genius has also ruled himself out. He tweeted, "Been on air with the One Show. I wasn't down to be doing Match of the Day tomorrow, but if I was, I would have said no and stood with my fellow pundits in Gary Lineker," as well as Alex Scott, who posted something on Twitter saying that she would not be doing it as well in a rather cryptic way. Now, the subsequent hours have seen strong condemnation of the decision from the Labour Party, among others, but also strong support from a number of Conservative voices, including former Minister Nadine Dorries. Earlier this week, Serving Housing Secretary Robert Jenrick called for Lineker to be stopped from working on the BBC. Lineker is freelance, who has a long-term agreement with the corporation, but he is not an employee.
He's not stepping back. It's not his decision. He's been taken off air by the BBC because he has refused to apologise for his tweet. Now, the question I'm asking myself is, will he ever present Match of the Day or work for the BBC again? Because he's a man of principle. And if he's not going to apologise, he's in a standoff with the BBC, which possibly means that we won't see him on BBC ever again. In 2020, Gary Lineker signed a 5-year contract with the BBC, and he agreed to adhere to their impartiality rules. Now, the impartiality rules are a little bit complicated depending on what area of the BBC you work in. For instance, if you're a news or current affairs journalist, you have to be totally impartial at all times. But of course, Gary Lineker is not a news or current affairs journalist. He works in the sports department, so he has a little bit more freedom. But he still has to avoid bringing the BBC into disrepute. However, as a high-profile figure on the BBC, he has additional responsibilities. And the guidelines say that the BBC expect these individuals to avoid taking sides on party political issues or political controversies. So that is what the guidelines say. But a lot of people are looking at this and saying, how come Andrew Neil, one of the most high-profile political journalists and interviewers on the BBC for many, many years, how come he is allowed to be the chairman of a right-wing magazine, The Spectator? How come he is allowed to express political opinions on Twitter as much as he wants? How come the chairman of the BBC, Richard Sharp, the chairman, is somebody who donated £400,000 to the Conservative Party, someone who has helped arrange an £800,000 loan for the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson? How come Robbie Gibb, or as we have to call him, Sir Robbie Gibb, who used to be the communications director for the former Prime Minister, Theresa May, how come he's on the BBC board at the moment? Why is Alan Sugar allowed to say what he wants on Twitter about political matters? What about Jeremy Clarkson? He's got a column in The Sun. He's got a column in the Sunday Times. He was on the BBC. He frequently expressed political opinions which many people think are extreme on social media. And why is the Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie, the Director General? He used to be the Deputy Chairman of the Hammersmith and Fulham Conservative Party. He's a man who's stood as a candidate in local elections for the Conservative Party. So why is all this allowed, yet Gary Lineker is not allowed to make a fairly innocuous comment, which many, many people would agree with, about a policy that has been condemned by the United Nations and also by many human rights groups? And this is the same Gary Lineker who's been allowed on the BBC to criticise the human rights record of Qatar. Why is he not allowed to criticise the human rights record of the country he lives in? And now the BBC have got a very, very big problem, because I don't know who is going to be willing to present Match of the Day tomorrow night, to appear on it as an analyst or a pundit. Even behind the scenes, a lot of people feel very, very strongly about this. And they feel that if Gary Lineker is being taken off air, they want nothing to do with Match of the Day tomorrow night either.
Well, as the story continues to develop, it's inspired huge amounts of debate across the social and political spectrum.
Well, I've heard that there's been some different competing and conflicting reports on this. So obviously this is just a matter for Gary Lineker and for the BBC. But my concern is that really the focus on this is being used by the government, both to find someone to blame and also to distract from their own serious failures on policies, and the fact that we've just not seen a strong enough and a big enough new agreement with France, given the challenges that we face.
There's a lot of former footballers and former managers on television and so on and presenting shows, but Gary Lineker presents the flagship sports programme on BBC, and he's a very good presenter at that. And I watch Match of the Day myself, but that also gives you a platform to the public. There's a lot of impressionable youngsters watching that as well. And then when you're using that platform, I think there's also a responsibility that goes with it as well. And again, I wouldn't want to silence anybody's opinions. I know he'll argue that he's not a politics presenter or a news presenter or so on, but he's clearly overstepped the mark here. I mean, what he said was grossly offensive, and he doesn't seem to be showing any contrition for that whatsoever.
Well, another take comes from outgoing Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, who tweeted this: as a strong supporter of public service broadcasting, I want to be able to defend the BBC, but the decision to take Gary Lineker off air is indefensible. It is undermining free speech in the face of political pressure, and it does always seem to be right-wing pressure it caves to.
Now here at Sky Sports News, we'll continue to chase reaction to this story across all political standpoints and reflect all sides of this debate.